Welcome to Liberty Sound with your host, Ryan Hill.
There's going to be a new world order out there. We've got to beat it.
And I'm going to nominate Donald Trump for Speaker of the United States House of Representatives.
All right, welcome to Liberty Sound in pursuit of broadcast excellence. You can find this show on Podbean Live, where I'm broadcasting now, and it'll also be on Podbean Podcasts, and then Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Rumble, and YouTube immediately after the show is over, or at least close to immediately. Show notes are in the description. As of now, hopefully one day I'll get back to putting those on my website, but it's a little bit more convenient and just it's more automatic this way. And you can find me, of course, Foa Ryan, that's Foaryan, on Truth Social. That's also my Gab and Twitter Twitter handle. Same on those three platforms, Foa Ryan, and then Foa Universe. Just change out the name Ryan for Universe because I was thinking universally when I made my Telegram account. And today, coming up on the show, we're going to talk state of the state. If you are an Oklahoma listener, please stay tuned because we want to talk about what's going on with the governor, the incumbent governor, Kevin Stitt, and his race against his own Secretary of Education or state school superintendent, who has switched parties and now is running against him. That's an interesting race. I'm also going to address the question of, should you even vote? I mean, with all that's going on, should you even vote, and why or why not? And also, was the PayPal testing, was that incident that just happened with the $2,500 fee? Was that like, were they just testing the waters? What's going on with that? So we've got a lot to get to today. And I'm sitting here in my studio, by the way. So I'm in front of all kinds of new pieces of equipment, which you can't see yet, but this new equipment will enable me to do some great broadcast excellent stuff. You know, I have my standards, all right? We don't lower our standards just to get a product out. So yes, you have to launch at some point. And I heard the expression, which is one of my favorite ones in business, is if you weren't embarrassed by the first version of your product, you waited too long to launch it. And so I've taken that approach, but I also have a minimum standard, and I don't want to get you a low quality show. This is supposed to be a good show, and it is a good show. I mean, after all, you're here, I'm here, we're having a great time. So yeah, I've got this video capture card, which is a neat little device that will enable me to have 4K or up to 4K, 60 frames per second HDMI inputs. And I have an old video camera that happens to be an HD camera that can do 1080p. It's not 4K, but it's still, I think 1080 is kind of like the minimum. Whenever I had this show, I was making the little the video versions of it on my own initially. It's kind of automated at this point, but it automates it at 720p. And I always feel like it should be at least 1080 because that's kind of just the minimum for modern standards. But now I at least technically have the ability to do that. So look for that coming up soon. When that happens, I'll let you know before I switch over to streaming on a platform like Rumble. But I've got a lot of other ideas coming up in the near future with that anyways, including a separate channel that's completely not political. We talk about politics here, which let's go ahead and get into the politics. But my other channels, I'll let you know about those in the days coming. And, you know, I've also got, I put a little note here about my old MacBook, that poor thing. I've been dragging it along as long as that camera. I think they're about the same age. And it turns out that my trackpad was not malfunctioning. It was just a preference file, and I got that all squared away. At least it works better than it did before. I have like 3/4 of the trackpad work as opposed to one little corner, and it couldn't click. Now it can click. So, you know, I don't know. That's fun. If that was exciting to you, then that's just terrific. That's why you're here. So anyways, the minute I follow Ye on Instagram, he got insta-banned. What's the deal with that? I mean, I just started following him, and the very next day, boom, he's gone. That was kind of fun. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we are going to get a little bit of the Ye interview with Tucker Carlson the other night, which I found very enlightening, and I think you need to hear some bits of it. So before we go into any headlines today, I want to give a shout out to somebody I've mentioned on this program a few times. Sarah Kane, who is another, she's got a show of her own, which is infinitely more popular than this one, but it's a good show. She is Crusader Gal, and she recently had a car accident. Like, she wasn't in a car, but somebody in a car hit her, and it broke both of her arms. It's like just a terrible thing. Like, she seems like she's okay, like her, she didn't get like her head bashed in or anything, but still, nobody wants to get hit by a car. Well, I've got an update from her, and I'm going to read this real quick. So she was hoping to regain some mobility in her left arm, but here's what she says. My left wrist, in which I broke my scaphoid bone, I don't even know what that is. I know the fibia and the tibula. That's all I know. Biology was a long time ago. But she says it's been in a brace for a month, and we were hoping that the bone would fuse back together. However, a recent x ray showed that not only has that not happened, it's in worse shape than it was weeks ago. As such, it's now been placed in a hard cast, reducing her mobility even further. And that was a last ditch effort to avoid surgery in her right arm. So that's a pretty serious situation. And she has a Give Send Go fund that is up. I just checked it before this program. They're about at halfway of the goal. And I will put that link in the description of the show. But if you want to go type it in real quick, it's givesendgo.com/Crusader Gal Fund. And, if you can help out in any way, don't help me, help her. She's obviously in need of this more than I am. I have both my arms and I'm moving them right now, and I don't have a cast on. All right, now let's get into some headlines. What we're all here for on the show is what's going on in the world and what's affecting liberty. Well, we start off with a look at derivatives. This was from, I guess it's a tweet. I mean, I got the image of it shared from somewhere else. I don't even know where I stole this from at this point, but it looks like banks are getting themselves over leveraged again. So what is a derivative? So, well, actually, let's answer first. What are these banks? Like, what's going on? So banks, according to Inflation Tracker on Twitter, are over leveraged by $2 quadrillion in derivatives. So that's why I asked the question, what are derivatives? Here's a list of some of the banks: JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and a lot of other names you've likely heard before. JP Morgan tops the list with over 61, I guess that's trillion. Just I'm looking at the numbers real quick. My numbers have fewer zeros and commas in them typically, so I think that's trillion, because if it adds up to quadrillions, so that's just one bank having $61 trillion in derivatives investments. Now, what are derivatives? According to Investopedia, derivatives are financial contracts, and they're set between two or more parties. They derive their value, hence the name, from an underlying asset or a group of assets or a benchmark. They actually get pretty complicated, but they can trade on exchanges like the Dow or the S&P 500 or any international exchanges, or they can be over the counter, which means you can go to a CVS and just buy it off the shelf. And prices derive from fluctuations in the underlying asset. So if it's tied to the market goes up, their value goes up, or their price goes up, and they are leveraged. So this is what makes them somewhat risky. And I'm not going to go into all the types or anything, but the most common ones are like futures. You hear about those a lot, and stock options, where, hey, okay, this stock may go up, may go down, but I want to guarantee that it won't go below a certain value because I can't handle that risk. It has a certain expiration date. So there are these complicated financial instruments. That's really what it boils down to. And it's not exactly the same as a subprime loan, which, if you recall, this is about the time I was buying my first house. That same year that all that crash was going on, I was buying my first home. And, the rates I don't think are back up quite to that level yet, but my first mortgage was like at 8%. And so people are talking about the rates going up now, and they are going up. It's not, it hurts anytime they go up. But when they were down to like 2 and 3% for a long time, it was really cheap to get a house. It was really a good time this last maybe 10 years to get into your first home. Now, refinances with the rates going up are going to go down. And I wonder, how is that going to impact these derivatives? I don't know. Because I don't have any derivatives. So thought I would bring that to the table because of all the other in just uneasiness going on. The market's up and down. It's down, actually. It's mostly down, but it'll go back up and go back down. We hope that one day before we all retire, it goes back up if you have any retirement funds in that manner. But over leveraged banks, that somehow that doesn't seem like a good idea. They put in all these restrictions and regulations right after that crash, which we had to do, of course, and I worked in banking in the aftermath of that, and it affected like how much cash that the bank had to have on reserve, how much could be leveraged, how much could be borrowed. And it's for all the regulation. You talk about the most regulated industry that there is. It's the financial industry. Maybe second would be medical, and maybe you could even argue medical is more regulated now than the other. But it's for all of that, they can't seem to get a grip on what these banks are doing. And we're not even talking about the Fed. We're just talking about consumer banks. So be on the lookout for, I don't know, crashes probably, or restructuring. Banks typically don't crash. Banks will find, they're in the business of making money. That's exactly what they do. That's the nature of their business. So I don't think they're going to crash, but you may see some acquisitions, some restructuring of this of their investments, because look at the market right now. I think the expiration of those derivatives is probably when it's going to start happening, and I don't know how that'll work. So we'll monitor that story and come back to it if and when those things start to occur. Now, have you heard about Patrick Byrne, who's been in the news again recently for a reason I'll get to in just a second? But have you seen his article that I think it's his website he put out today or yesterday? It's for a couple of days ago. It's from the 8th. It is his response to Robert Reich, who put out an op-ed naming him and many other people such as Mike Lindell, Donald Trump, the man himself, and others who are perpetuating what Reich calls the big lie regarding the 2020 election. So Pat Byrne has a response that he puts out to it. Now let's look at what he's responding to first. So here's Reich's article, and he says he has a serious question for people who have power in America, which is an interesting way of putting it, but I think he means influence, and who continue to deny the outcome of the 2020 election and enable Trump's big lie, with caps as a title, So he says, what are you saying to yourself in private? How are you justifying this stuff to yourself in your own mind? And he goes on for several paragraphs and sentences and names a few different people and says, if this is, even if true, is power so intoxicating to you, such an important end in itself that you'll do anything for it. So he's just pitching the CNN lines that they have been talking about ever since, and just keeping it going, even though CNN, I guess, doesn't call it the big lie anymore and is getting sued by Trump. So obviously, my take before we get to the response is that Trump and company do believe what they're doing is right, because they wouldn't be putting these large lawsuits on the line, getting ready to suffer loss. And I think Reich even admits people like Lindell are basically making their legacy on this issue of the elections, and losing money in many cases. So what does Pat Byrne say in response to that? He says, first things first, we had a mutual friend in Professor William Sleznick, who I don't know who that is. Though I knew him for many years after you did, he often spoke to me of his admiration for your mind, your drive, and your character. So he's, buttering him up a little bit. He's not just slamming him right off the bat. Let's skip down in Byrne's article a little bit. It says, second, I see that you have taken to living under a rock. Your recent essay, Robert Reich, A Personal Question to Powerful People Who Continue to Deny the Results of the 2020 Election, which we just read a little bit from. And he repeats the question. He says, I accept your invitation, and to bring you up to speed, since he's been under a rock, on what it is that we of the election integrity movement understand ourselves to be doing. So it's worded very clearly, I think, he'd spent some time making sure that this says what he wants it to say. On June 3rd, 2022, he goes on, DHS dash CISA, CISA, issued a 5-page report that might as well have been titled Patrick Byrne Was Right Again. In 5 succinct pages, it explains the most common election system we use in the USA turns out to be riddled with 9 major security vulnerabilities, so gaping that in my view it is more appropriate to call them security failures than vulnerabilities. As apparently you missed this development, I will quote their descriptions of 9 hacks of Dominion equipment that tabulate 43% of the ballots cast by Americans on November 3rd, 2020. This guy's clearly done his homework. And he lists them off. Now, some of them are a bit repetitive, but he's not giving the the background on each of these points. So the result is, in a lot of cases, that malicious code could be installed on these machines, giving an attacker what's called elevated privileges, which means they can do things that an ordinary poll worker or ballot caster would not. Like, for example, I cast a ballot. All I can do is feed a piece of paper into the machine and look at the screen and say, oh, okay, there it goes. A poll worker can open and close the polls. A back office worker might be able to reprogram the machine, and maybe that's the elevated privileges they're talking about. Or a Dominion contractor, for example. Another one says an attacker could leverage this vulnerability to spread malicious code to ImageCast X devices from the EMS, or Election Management System, which I believe is what that stands for. And finally, an attacker could leverage this last vulnerability to print an arbitrary number of ballots without authorization. This is from a government report. This is not from Patrick Byrne. He's just quoting the report from DHS slash CISA. And it's worth your read. It's not that long, but it does get a little bit technical, and he links to even more technical reports that you can really go into. It is called deepculture.com, and it is probably one of his most recent articles. I'll put that in the notes as well. So that's interesting. But as I briefly started to say before I got going on this, I thought it was interesting that Pat Byrne was just brought up on somebody's Rumble channel. And forgive me, I don't remember the name right now. I've seen him before. I think I've seen another segment from him. But he said, this came out just a couple days ago. He said, breaking, Patrick Byrne invested in Connex software. And Connex, as you know, if you've listened to this program or follow certain accounts on Truth Social, Connex is that company that their CEO was just arrested. In fact, I don't even know if that did that happen since last week. It's hard to remember sometimes between social media and being behind the microphone, but we've talked about it on this program, that Kanekoa Substack, where he's been researching it, and since the pit event when people were tipped off to look into this. I still have a lot of questions about it, but the fact remains that CEO has been arrested, and the company has been exposed publicly for having poll worker information stored on servers that are not in the US. In fact, they were in China. And since that time, a number of cities and counties have been terminating their contracts. So it is a big story. I think there were some disputes over who should get the credit for the story, and I think that those conversations ought to be had. However, maybe later would be a better time to have those than right now, right before the election, when we're trying to move the needle in our country. The software is called Poll Chief, and evidently Pat Byrne somehow invested in this software. But if you watch the actual video, which I'm hesitant to even link to because I think it's kind of damaging unnecessarily, Byrne had divested from this parent company that was investing in Connex, and it may have even been an indirect investment. You know how these capital groups work, is like it's like buying a mutual fund. Well, I don't actually go buy an individual stock. I just say, well, I want this, blue chip round stock. You can tell I do a lot of this, right? You just invest in a generic fund, and then a fund manager decides which individual stocks or companies get to be invested in from there. And even at that, Byrne had divested from this before all this Connex stuff had started going on. So I think I would, if I was doing a fact check or a PolitiFact, I would say needs context on that breaking report that he invested in the software, because how much was it, one of 1,000 investments, or was that 30% of his portfolio? So you have to put it in context, and so all that together, those are all related. We've got the attack from Reich on Byrne. You've got Byrne's response, and then also somehow he, at one point or another, directly or indirectly, was connected to Konek, which has been in the news. So I'm just kind of watching this to see. I wish I could give you a more bona fide opinion on what's going on there, but I do think that it looks like, if you just read what Byrne's article was, that he is exposing not the big lie, it's the big truth. It's the truth behind what's really going on in our election system. So speaking of election deniers, as they call it, and Robert Reich at least worded it in a way that he didn't say election denier. He said those who deny the outcome of the 2020 election. That's not even really how I would put it. I would say we have a dispute about the true outcome of the 2020 election. You can't deny the way he words it assumes that the outcome that Fox News, CNN, the AP, and our electoral process considers the true winner. But as we talked about recently with the fishing story, as soon as they found those weights inside the fish, they disqualified the winner. He was not the true winner because he cheated. So context matters. However, PayPal may now fine me $2,500 for telling you that. But they have retracted the statement, or said something like, we didn't really put it out. I don't know what that was, but it sounds like it was an actual policy. Somebody pointed out that I read that this was a written policy. It wasn't just a headline, it was an actual policy. And they're now saying, well, no, we're not going to have that policy in place. So what were they doing? Were they testing the waters? They want to see, how are people reacting to this? Could be, probably. Seems like that's what all of these egregious acts, whether public or private, have been about recently. And so, yeah, would you be inclined to do business with PayPal, knowing that they could siphon out by fiat, by their own changing terms of conditions that they can change whenever they want, $2,500 if you say something on any platform, from what I'm hearing, that they don't like? Well, what do you do when there's not $2,500 in the PayPal account? I guess they just give you a charge or something, and then what? You can't close the account? I don't know. And it probably wouldn't stand up in a U.S. court. If I don't know if it was in a different country where that policy was starting to come out of, or what. But they have backed off, and a lot of people have been upset. Their stocks have been taking a hit, albeit likely temporary, but we'll see what goes on with their. Let's see. I already talked about the cities terminating their contracts with Connect. They are disconnecting, and the CEO. In another related election story, the Griswold Glitch. Did you hear about this? I don't have a particular story to link you to, like a news article, but the Colorado Democrat Secretary of State, Jenna Griswold, had mistakenly sent 30,000 illegals postcards from the. I got that from the AP, at least. I know they've reported on it. So somehow a glitch, according to her, resulted in 30,000, let's just call them resident aliens, okay? Because I don't know if they were all here illegally, but they were people who either didn't have a driver's license, or they had a type of driver's license that they're allowed to get without being citizens of the United States. And they're not eligible to vote, at least not in federal elections. And yet somehow they were all sent these postcards letting them know how to register to vote. Or maybe it was a voter registration card. I'm not sure what was in the postcard. And that's just really interesting, because another story in Oklahoma that has from this year is that we almost had a bill that was going to get driver's licenses going to people who are here illegally, because there's a push from the left and from the rhino side of the right. They're not really on the right. Well, I don't know. Left and right is kind of, fungible these days anyways, but they're the globalists, the uniparty. And here in little old Oklahoma, red state Oklahoma, we had a bill that started making its way through our legislature this year that was going to give people who are not here legally an opportunity to get a driver's license. Now, I think you can get a state ID regardless of your status, but there's certain privileges that are not afforded to those who are not legally participating in our system. So we're not going to get into, all the back and forth on what should we do with those people who are here in that situation or who grew up here because their parents brought them and all that stuff. But the fact is their current status is not legal, right? So can't get a driver's license in this state unless this legislation were to pass. There's also this connection with, in our state, we use a system called, or at least we ostensibly will be using a system called ERIC, which a lot of other states have already signed on to, and they compare information from state to state. I wonder if any of that information goes through a Chinese server. We better find out. They are requiring as a part of their contract that you inform people when they get their driver's license about registering to vote. Or like, even if they say they're not interested when they get it, you have to send them a postcard or send them something in the mail. So it sounds like the same thing to me. This is in Colorado, and they don't use the same elections apparatus that we do here in Oklahoma. In fact, they have like that all mail-in system. And yeah, just a glitch, 30,000 could have resulted in 30,000 excess registrations that shouldn't have been there. What other kind of database glitches are going on? I mean, this is concerning, all right? And the more software is involved with our elections, the more questions we, the people, are going to have about all of this. All right, that's enough on that. If I had break music for you this week, I would go into the break right now. But since I don't, we'll just keep on going. So pretend I had a break while I'm even going to do this. All right. This is not totally professional, but I'm going to take a drink of water. All right. Beautiful. It's good water too. It was discount. It was 99-cent water. Makes me feel good drinking it, just knowing I got a deal, even though it would have been 50 cents a couple of years ago, but now it's discounted to 99 cents in our current economic environment. So I have mentioned this show before. This is in the entertainment column. Have you heard of the Medici Masters of Florence series? I think that's what it's called. Excuse me. Now I'm coughing. I should have coughed while I got that drink. But the Medici were a banking family in Renaissance Italy that were very powerful for hundreds of years. Actually, they were papal bankers. I think that they sponsored Leonardo da Vinci at one point. If not him, it was some other famous Renaissance artists and inventors. And so they had a lot to do with the history of Italy and the Republic of Florence, which at the time, Italy wasn't like we know it today as a single united country, but they were related in some way. So I've been watching the show. I've mentioned it once or twice, or on this show, I've mentioned it, and I've been getting some enjoyment out of it. So I'm at getting my oil changed the other day, and I just happened to bump into an OU professor, and guess what he's talking about on the phone? He's talking to someone who turns out to be a researcher somewhere over in Wales or England or something like that, who is researching Galileo and or the de Medici family. And so he's explaining, the professor is on the phone, what he knows about this family, which I'm intrigued by. And so I thought, what in the world? And so as soon as he hung up, I said, excuse me, I heard you just, I wasn't trying to overhear your conversation, but you're talking really loud. And I heard you say Medici. And so we talked about it a little bit, and I let him know about the show. And I think he had heard of it, but, hadn't seen it. So, why do I keep hearing about these things? Whenever they keep showing up over and over, the same message or the same phrase, I always think, okay, I need to look into this a little bit more. So I've already looked into the family quite a bit. I mean, I just said what kind of intrigues me about them. So anyways, thought I would mention that as we move into our topical segment. Now let us talk about the topics. All right. So I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Governor Stitt here in my home state, my adult home state, as opposed to the home state of my childhood, Texas. But here in Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt, who came into office after Trump and kind of rode the sort of Trump business-like, going to take care of business wave. He was a president of Gateway Mortgage Group. I think he might still be on the board. I don't know what that is right now, but he's governor. And he was really popular at first, but now he's being challenged by Joy Hoffmeister, who has been the state school superintendent for, I think, longer than he's been in office, actually. She replaced Janet Barisi, who I forget the Democrat that she replaced. Barisi was a Republican, and I think still is. Hoffmeister was a Republican, and both of them ran on, at least on the surface, a type of conservative platform. However, Barisi brought us Common Core that was implemented under her watch, and she didn't apparently object to it at all, even though that may be what supporters were led to believe when she ran, which is unfortunate. So Hoffmeister comes in, and we did undo Common Core, but it wasn't necessarily because she was in favor of that. She did, however, help implement whatever our new standards are now, and there was kind of some controversy over the way that I think Barisi brought this in, the A through F grading standard for our school districts. The government was trying to come up with a way that parents could, at a glance, see a report card type evaluation of how their school district was doing and help parents make choices in where they want to live and what school districts they might be a part of, which is interesting. Probably needs to be done in some fashion, but who is deciding what gets an A and what gets an F? And that's where the controversy and the politics come in. But since that time, we've had the teacher walkout, which occurred in multiple states, but one of them that got a lot of attention, got attention on MSNBC, of course, was the teacher walkout in Oklahoma, where the teachers were vying for um, more pay, right? So that's kind of Hoffmeister's claim to fame, is she really supported that. The teachers seemed to like her. So Hoffmeister, the Republican, coming into this year, has changed her party, and she's now a Democrat. So interestingly, Tulsi Gabbard just walked away from the Democrat Party. I think she's going to be an independent now, from the senator from Hawaii. But Hoffmeister is now running against Stitt for the governor's race. Obviously, that's why she changed parties, because it was advantageous to do so, to run again, because she wouldn't have been able to primary him, but with the support of the Democrat Party, which she now has, it's going to be an interesting race. And according to the most recent polls, that race is now tightening. This is from News on 6, an Oklahoma City update in a press release. Let's see. Wait a second. Am I getting ahead of myself? I am, just a little bit. That's not about the polls. Let's read the polls real quick here first. So Sooner poll said, let's see, on October 3rd through the 6th, they have Hoffmeister up 4 points, 47 to 43% over Stitt now. But a late September poll by American Viewpoint had Stitt up plus 15. And then another poll at the same time frame had Hoffmeister up plus 1. Similar polls from Amber Integrated, which is an interesting entity in the state, had Mullen and Langford who are running in the Senate, enjoying comfortable leads over Kendra Horn and Madison Horde, who are the Democrat opponents there. So it seems to me that the Republicans really had an advantage, as you would expect in this state, though sometimes our governor's races, we've had Democrat governors in the not too distant past here. Are these polls skewed? I don't know. How much of this is organic? Because as I said, when Stitt first came into office, he was trying to get us to be a top 10 state in all these different categories. We're going to lower taxes. He claims he's lowered taxes, although I think it was like a quarter cent on groceries or something like that, and it still didn't even really amount to much. But he's ostensibly been running on a pro-business, low regulation kind of government. But in the last couple of years, I would argue, even since COVID, at the beginning of COVID, I thought he was doing great. But as time went on, he seemed to cave in to the people that wanted everything shut down. He instituted a curfew, because we all know that COVID gets deadlier after 10 o'clock at night, and we must shut down our few restaurants that are left and still providing food and alcohol to people. What exactly was that all about? That didn't make a lot of people happy, like myself, who are more focused on individual liberty. And we're not, Republicans tend to be pro-business, but that doesn't mean pro-liberty. That just means pro-revenue in a lot of cases. And I think that had a lot to do with his decision. So now, with the polls in mind and everything, this is the news of today. And so, as of today, Tuesday, the 11th, Tuesday, October the 11th, a bunch of the tribes in Oklahoma are endorsing Hoffmeister and not Stitt. Of course, Stitt has been trying to negotiate with the tribes over a lot of the fallout from the McGirt decision, and just there are matters, there are situations with the tribes in Oklahoma because we have multiple governments in this state. It's just always there's some back and forth going on. So, according to News on 6, in a press release emailed to News 9, which is affiliated with 6, the Stitt campaign responded to the announcement. Governor Stitt is proud to have the endorsement of the Oklahoma State Fraternal Order of Police, as well as the support of thousands of tribal members across the state. His campaign manager, Donnell Harder, said, or this was the statement that she put out, I guess. So she says, because Governor Stitt has delivered on his promises to turn deficits into surpluses, to deliver safe communities, to fund teachers and education at historic highs, all while cutting taxes for every Oklahoman. So they kind of danced around the issue of, not getting this endorsement, which I don't know if they were necessarily seeking. But here's what the tribal leaders have cited in another email sent to News 9/6. They cited Hoffmeister's respect for tribal sovereignty, which would be kind of a jab at Stitt, and her commitment to work with the state's tribes as reasons for their endorsement. And here it is. Joy Hoffmeister recognizes that we all want the same things: safe communities, a strong economy, a stable workforce, well-funded education, investments in our infrastructure, and a continued focus on health and wellness, family and community. When it comes to working with the tribal nations in Oklahoma, she understands our sovereignty is not a partisan issue or threat, but instead is a chance to forge new partnerships while strengthening those that already exist, because Oklahomans thrive together when we all work together. So there's going to be, I don't know if there's a debate coming up. I hope there is. I bet there will be a debate, even if it hasn't been announced yet, because I need to hear these two politicians. Actually, I don't want to hear either of these politicians, but I need to hear the politicians debate on this issue about how to work with the tribes. And it is a complicated issue. I agree that it shouldn't be partisan, and it hasn't been partisan until the last 10 or 15 years, at least that I'm aware of, because, well, really, it's been kind of bipartisan to not give the tribes anything that they want. That's kind of been the bipartisan consensus. But it's been more, I think, apparent in recent times that just we have reservations. They have their own governments. They are sovereign tribes. However, they do vote in federal elections. So there's some differences, there's some similarities, and the tribes do need to be treated with respect, but it's going to take some creative negotiation, because whatever the governor and the AG have been trying to work out has not been received by the leaders of the largest tribes. And I think there's an argument to be made that they are more pro-democrat, pro-liberal ideology for a variety of reasons. But in Oklahoma, being a liberal is a little bit different than like in California or in New Jersey. The split here is more on the right side of the spectrum altogether, even though we have still a left and a right. And it's part of, again, why I don't really think it's left and right anymore, but that's still a division that exists. So we'll keep following that. And in the coming weeks, we'll see if those polls continue to go Hoffmeister's direction. And I will try to look into the internals of some of these polls too and see what the sampling rate is. Are they online only polls? How are they getting their data? And we may slice and dice it just a little bit more. In the Senate race, the two Senate races that are coming up, because one's a special election, one is the expiration of a regular term. There's a lot of people that are not going to be stomaching a Langford vote, even though they might vote Republican on the rest of the ticket. I'm not here to advise you to do one way or the other, but I am going to mention that there is also a Libertarian Party candidate in the race between Horn and Langford. Okay, so the Libertarian Party's name is Kenneth Blevins, and I don't even want to tell you how I intend to vote necessarily, because I'm just real big on not telling people how to vote. I want to just arm you with information, let you make the decision. So if you're contemplating what to do there, here's a little bit, and not an endorsement, but here's a little bit of his platform. He wants to get corrupt career politicians out of office, which is probably, a slap at really Horn and Langford, because both of them have been in office. He wants to stop wasteful government spending and eliminate both the deficit and debt along with inflation, and wants to restore the buying power of the US dollar. I haven't heard that rhetoric out of the Republicans in the state. I mean, I just haven't. And maybe they're saying it, but they need to say it a little bit more loud and clear. He also wants to take care of veterans and get them proper health care. I looked over the rest of his stances, at least what he had provided. It's some pretty standard libertarian policy positions, but he does have the emphasis on the healthcare system, and particularly I think for veterans who, are often not given the proper care, even though we have made some strides and improvements with the VA in the state, and some as the result of Trump's work as president too. So that is enough for the state of the state races this week. We'll see if there's any other interesting ones to cover in the few weeks remaining before that election comes up. So next up, we have Ye was on Tucker Carlson last week on Thursday and had a really interesting interview that has been having some ripple effects. Of course, this all started when he wore the White Lives Matter shirt at the French fashion show, which I didn't watch. I just saw the picture of it. I don't really watch fashion shows. Was that the one where they were all walking in the mud? Is it the same show? I don't know. It's just weird stuff going on in the fashion world. So, I don't know. I won't even try to get myself involved there. But he wore that shirt, and so did Candace Owens, I think. So it's making some waves. Why are you wearing this White Lives Matter shirt? And then he says in the interview that his dad is laughing at him, saying, you're just a black man stating the obvious. And that's unfortunate, because I think what he meant is, basically like, here's the narrative, here's the rhetoric, and it goes right in line with what Black Lives Matter played on, although didn't invent. And that's that, well, the white man just gets everything. He gets all the breaks, he has all the connections, he's in all the clubs. And of course, white lives matter. Everybody knows that because whites have all the privileges. At least that's what that perspective is, right? But Kanye is out there breaking the norms, breaking the narratives, as he does from time to time. And this is one of them. It's apparently caused a division, or continues a division, even within his own family. He also talked about how his wife, or is she an ex-wife now, Kim Kardashian, was influenced by her supposed friends to take certain positions. And so he's been speaking out about all this. And of course, this interview was before he got banned on Instagram, which happened right after I followed him. So here's the first thing that he says, and you get a glimpse of why exactly they're afraid of him, or they consider him a threat.
I don't care about people's responses. I care about the fact that there's more black babies being aborted than born in New York City at this point. That 50% of black death in America is abortion. So I really don't care about people's responses. I perform for an audience of one, and that's God.
More black babies aborted than born in New York City. That's pretty astounding, and that puts it into perspective. That is some powerful language there. And yeah, not the kind of thing that the people who support these late-term abortions and post-birth, partial birth abortions, they don't want that getting out there. They want to avoid this issue. They never answer the question. If you ever listen to those interviews of these Democrats who support these positions, they won't answer the question because they know how despicable and disgusting it is. So they have to couch it in, kind of prettied up language, if I could even use that phrase. And 50%, did he say 50% of black babies or would-be babies are aborted? Is that really true? I mean, I haven't seen like a study or a survey to show that statistic, but oh my goodness, that is just uncomprehensible to me, or incomprehensible. Can't even say it. And so now, what does he say about wearing the shirt. Well, has that had an impact? You tell me.
They basically said that I would be killed for wearing the hat. I had someone call me last night and said anybody wearing a White Lives Matter shirt is going to be greenlit, and that means that they're going to beat them up if they wear it. And I'm like, okay, green light me then. God builds warriors in a different way.
That he does. So what is he were those indirect threats against his life or against his safety? Kind of sounds like it. And, the implication too is just like with Trump supporters, when they can't get Trump to stop saying things that aren't approved by the mainstream narrative controllers, they try to go after his supporters, and they will go down different levels as need be in order to get people to stop talking. At least so they think. I always think back to it was like a California Trump rally in 2015 or 2016, maybe more of a fundraising event than a rally, but he was trying to win delegates in the primary. And some girl was out, trying to keep some protesters from getting through the crowd to get inside. And she was kind of mocking them and taunting them a little bit. Well, then they had eggs, which probably, too expensive to do this now, but they threw eggs in her face. And I still remember seeing that picture of her just for standing out there trying to stop them from coming in and causing a scene, which they caused outside. And there were a lot of protests at those rallies too. And you'll see, people. In fact, when I went to the Tulsa Trump rally, I was looking for a bathroom because I couldn't, everything was closed. It was like early Saturday morning and in downtown, not like in a retail area, it was like the business area or something. And as I'm walking down the street, there are individuals on the balconies of what I guess was an apartment complex yelling obscenities at the girls walking up and down the street who were probably also looking for a restroom. And just before the rally was going on, because they looked like Trump supporters, kind of like that guy who got run over and killed recently because he, looked like an extremist, and it scared the person who was on the other extreme. And these are just intimidation tactics, and unfortunately they're getting more and more violent. So that's what he is dealing with. Maybe be glad if you're not dealing with things like that. But he said at the end there, that God develops warriors in a different way, and he gets an interesting cross reference here to David and Goliath. Now listen to this.
It's like with David, he tended to the sheep, but while he was out there, he had to fight all kinds of animals. So when it was time for Goliath to come, you thought because he was a sheep herder that he didn't have the skill set to take down Goliath. And the thing that I have is the position, I have my heart, but the number one thing is we have God on our side. And for the people, even if you don't believe in God, God believes in you.
Well, let's see. I thought I was muted, and then I muted instead of unmuting. So hope I didn't make too much noise during that last soundbite. But I mean, that's some good. Does that sound like a crazy person to you? And he goes on to say, what he was asked. Tucker asked him, "Why did you choose to do the White Lives Matter stunt, if I can call it that?" And his answer was that he goes off of intuition, from a feeling. And he said it's a gut instinct and a connection with God and brilliance. Of course, you had to throw in the brilliance there. Can't do without some of that, because you could have a gut instinct and a connection with God and idiocy and it would work out too well. But, that's just, I think that is, it all boils down to this. If you go off of your convictions based on what you've learned, the experiences in your life, and you are trying to do good in the world, even though we may not always agree on what is good or how to accomplish good things. But if you do that, that means that you're not at the behest of people who are telling you what to do. Just like I don't want to tell you who to vote for, I want to give you information so that you can filter that through your belief system and decide if it's the right choice for you. When somebody like him does that, though, because of, as he would even put it in the interview, that there's such a grip on people in the Black community that they're supposed to talk a certain way, they're supposed to act a certain way, and that's what's good, as opposed to this is somebody who's gone from nothing and become a billionaire, or maybe not nothing, but he's gone from a lowly state to making a ton of money, has his own brands, has his own projects, and whatever you think about him aside, I realize a lot of people aren't exactly a fan of this guy, but I'm just throwing it out here that this is what happens when Trump or him, or you could even say Putin. I hate to put all three of those guys together right now with everything that's going on in the world, but they're all going off script according to the mainstream consensus, right? And it's making them very popular in some ways, but it's also making them kind of unpopular. So if that can be a segue into my next topic, or one of my last ones here for the show today, just a quick word on not being popular and why that can actually be an advantage too. So I personally, I don't latch on to ideas just because some host that's got a Fox show, or I even used to watch CNN, just being honest here. Some of the shows on there, not necessarily all of them, but I thought I was getting objective information at one point in my life from them. And, but just because somebody on there, or an account that's got a lot of followers on social media, says something and it gets a lot of retweets, or the video goes viral, or everybody's talking about it at work, which I don't know, you can't talk about politics at work anymore, but in the break rooms, in the private conversations, just because somebody's got that opinion, I don't necessarily go along with it. All right. Now, this makes me strong in some ways, but it probably also keeps me from getting invited to a lot of parties, if you know what I mean. So I commented this week, I don't have like a super high number of followers, and part of it is because of the platforms I choose to go on. I still have more followers on Twitter than any other platform I've ever been on, I think. And second to that would be Facebook, but I don't use those accounts and platforms anymore because of ideological differences, and I don't like what they have done, so I don't want to amplify their platforms, because every time all the time you spend on those platforms, they're making money. Okay, they're sending you ads, they are feeding you information, they are manipulating people's thoughts with their algorithms and all that. So I choose to opt out of it. Now that does lower me down a notch as far as my reach can go, but I try not to completely abandon those platforms at the same time. But when you are in a position like that, it's it's much easier to, like, when drama is going on and things like that, you don't have to get involved. And it can be an advantage strategically because you don't have to take a side. Whereas if you were popular, if you were somebody who can't walk down the street without being recognized, like some of the other shows I listen to, I hear the host talking about like the big shows. I mean, like the ones that are getting the midday time slot that Rush Limbaugh used to have, these household kind of names, or at least household names for people who are politically active, like Bongino or Glenn Beck or Sean Hannity, people like that get recognized wherever they go. All right. And you might think that's great. I want to have, some people look at me. Well, that can also get really old really fast. And a lot of people have to deal with that. So you also get expected to have an immediate opinion about things that might have to be a reactionary kind of response. And I try to avoid those things. So in some ways, it's good to be on the low and low. The Bible has a lot to say about humility, and also I was listening to, I watched these other podcasts and other video casts that talk about streaming and live streaming, and I follow other accounts that have various levels of followers that watch their videos and their streams, because I want to see how people at different tiers are doing it and try to incorporate the good into my own. And I don't know, it's interesting the way they at each level you've got different features and facets. It reminds me of an old Six Flags commercial, Six Flags Over Texas, where I grew up in the Dallas Fort Worth area. I think they're in Arlington. They were at one time the number 2 theme park, and they made an ad about being number 2. Usually you make an ad about being number 1, but their catchphrase was this: when you're number 2, you've got a lot of things that number 1 doesn't, or something to that effect. And so that's kind of how I look at things. So if you are out there and you don't have, you're like me, you're not going to a lot of parties, hey, don't be upset about it. You should just, appreciate the benefits that come with that, because there's actually a lot of freedom that comes with that. And I don't know about you, but I like freedom, and I like the freedom to make choices that I think will benefit me and not have a lot of strings attached. So I had a few other things to talk about real quick before I start playing the outro music. One thing I mentioned in the description, so I better bring it up, is about being on social platforms. Right along with that, why should you be on multiple social platforms? Like, for example, I've got one where I've got 15 followers on it. Why do I even go there? Well, there's a number of reasons. One is you don't know when there's going to be another purge, another cancel gate going on. Like, I didn't get purged off of Twitter. I think I was probably just shadow banned or semi shadow banned the whole time, or too curmudgeony to get more than 2,000 followers on there. But if you are banned off of a platform and that's your only platform, you have to start all the way over. So I do recommend to people who want to have a community online, get on different ones. Like, there's Gab, there's Gitter, there's Parler, there's Truth Social. There's even some other ones like, what is it? Clout, Frank Speech, Telegram. I mean, there's all kinds of different ones. And no, you can't spend all of your time on all of them. That would get overwhelming. But maybe from time to time, you go put some input into one of those platforms and say, hey, this week I'm going to spend more time on Gab and interact with the people that are on there, or see if some of the people I follow on other platforms, in case they get canceled, I will still get their content elsewhere. So that's my 2 cents on that. My 2 bits, and my 2 bits on voting are also, I've talked about it before, so I won't go into it, in depth, but should you vote? Yes, you should vote. This is our system of governance. This is how we choose our representatives in this representative republic that we're supposed to live in. And if you don't vote, you're actually opting out of the republic. Did you ever think of it that way? If you protest by not voting, you're basically saying, well, this government can just go on with or without me. And it will. That's the thing, is it will. Whether or not you vote, the government's going to go on. I wish there was an option on the ballot that said, should we have government? Yes or no? And then if the answer is no, they all have to go home. All right. But that's not going to happen. All right. So meantime, it's the point of diminishing returns. Okay. Sometimes I can't stomach a person, and I'm going to vote different than maybe what my Republican friends might like me to vote for. But at least cast the vote, at least make your voice known. And more so, it matters, I think, even in the primaries than later on. And that is where, unfortunately, a lot of the funny business may be taking place, because if you can select your candidates ahead of time, to where no matter if the Republican or the Democrat wins, you get basically the same policies, well, that's what happens. So that's all I have to say about it. Next week, maybe we'll talk more about why you should vote on the day of the election, as opposed to, mailing it in early, or even early in-person voting. So until next time, I will catch you later. Walk in liberty, and we'll see you next week. Jazar. Outro music, Chase, by Alexander Nakarada. Royalty-free music used under Creative Commons License 3.0 and 4.0 International, creativecommons.org. The Liberty Sound podcast is produced in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Copyright 2022, Ryan Hill and Liberty Sound. All rights reserved.